The mess hall at Camp Pendleton fell silent in that particular way. That means violence is about to happen. 200 Marines eating breakfast stopped mid-bite as the tall corporal with the 2nd Battalion insignia grabbed the small woman by her shoulder and spun her around. She'd been carrying a tray of scrambled eggs and toast, heading toward an empty table in the corner where she could eat alone like she'd done every morning for the past 3 weeks. The corporal's friends were laughing already, that anticipatory sound of men who think they're about to witness something entertaining. The woman didn't resist the spin. She turned with it actually, smooth as water, and when she faced him her expression held nothing but mild curiosity. She was maybe 5'4", slim build, wearing standard Navy utilities that hung loose on her frame. No ribbons, no badges, no indication of anything remarkable. The corporal towered over her by almost a foot. "Do you know who I am?" he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. His hand was still on her shoulder, thumb digging in hard enough to leave marks. "I'm Corporal Hayes, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Division. I've done 3 tours in Helmand Province. I've earned my place in this chow hall." She looked at his hand, then at his face. Her eyes were gray, pale as winter light. "I can see your name tape," she said quietly. "Good for you on the deployments." Hayes squeezed harder. "Then maybe you want to explain what a Navy POG is doing eating in a Marine mess hall. Because last I checked, sailors belong on ships, not taking up space meant for real warfighters." The woman said nothing. Around them, the silence deepened. Someone dropped a fork and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Hayes' friends were grinning now, sensing blood in the water. This was going to be a story they told for weeks. How Hayes put some random squid in her place, sent her running back to whatever desk job she was hiding behind. The woman set down her tray on the nearest table with movements so precise they looked choreographed. Then she looked up at Hayes again and spoke 3 words, each one landing like a hammer blow in the sudden quiet. "Remove your hand." Her voice hadn't risen above conversational volume. Hayes laughed. It was a mistake. He didn't know it yet, but in 30 seconds his entire worldview was going to restructure itself. In 60 seconds he'd be on the floor. And in 2 minutes, every Marine in that mess hall would understand why you never, ever judge a warrior by their size, their gender, or the absence of ribbons on their chest. The woman with gray eyes was about to teach a lesson that Camp Pendleton wouldn't forget. Hayes' mistake wasn't just grabbing her. It was assuming that the absence of visible credentials meant the absence of capability. He'd spent 5 years in the Corps learning that the most dangerous weapons were the ones you didn't see coming, but he'd never applied that wisdom to people. Now his fingers were still digging into her shoulder, and his smirk was still plastered across his face when she moved. The movement was so small and so fast that most of the watching Marines missed it entirely. Her right hand came up and caught his wrist, not hard but with precise placement that hit the pressure point between radius and ulna. Her left hand rose simultaneously, palm striking the inside of his elbow. Basic joint manipulation, the kind taught in every combative's course, but executed with a fluidity that spoke of thousands of repetitions. Hayes' arm bent at angles arms aren't meant to bend, and suddenly he was rotating forward, his body following his compromised limb through space. She guided him down to his knees with the same calm efficiency she'd used to set down her breakfast tray. The whole sequence took maybe 2 seconds. In the silence that followed, someone's coffee cup hit the floor and shattered. Hayes was on his knees now, his arms still controlled by her 2-handed grip, his face registering confusion more than pain. She held him there, not applying enough pressure to break anything but making it absolutely clear that she could. "When someone asks you to remove your hand," she said, still in that same conversational tone, "it's usually polite to comply." Then she let him go and stepped back, hands dropping to her sides, open and empty. Hayes scrambled to his feet, his face flushing red. His friends had stopped laughing. Around the mess hall, 200 Marines watched with the focused attention of people witnessing something important. The woman picked up her tray again. "I apologize for the disruption," she said to the room at large. "I just want to eat my breakfast." She turned toward her corner table. That should have been the end of it. Hayes should have walked away, ego bruised but body intact, and counted himself lucky. Instead, he did what angry men have been doing since the beginning of time. He lunged. This time she didn't use his momentum against him. This time she met force with force. Hayes outweighed her by at least 80 pounds, but when his hands reached for her shoulders, she dropped her center of gravity, pivoted inside his reach, and drove her shoulder into his solar plexus with the full power of her legs and core behind it. The impact sounded like a car door slamming. Hayes' feet left the floor. He traveled backward 3 feet and landed flat on his back, the wind knocked out of him in a spectacular whoosh that everyone heard. The woman stood over him, breathing normally, not even winded. "Stay down," she said. Hayes did not stay down. He couldn't. 200 Marines were watching and his pride was bleeding out all over the floor, and the only way to salvage this was to prove that the first 2 moves had been flukes, lucky shots that any trained fighter could land if their opponent wasn't ready. So he got up, sucking air, and he charged again. This time she sidestepped like a matador, and his momentum carried him past her into a table that collapsed under his weight, sending trays and food flying. He rolled through the wreckage and came up swinging, a wide haymaker that had genuine power behind it. She ducked under it easily and swept his legs. He hit the floor face first. Now he was angry. Now the training was kicking in, the thousands of hours in the combative's gym, the muscle memory that made Marines dangerous even when their judgment was compromised. He came up faster this time, hands properly positioned, stance balanced. He threw a jab-cross combination that would have dropped most opponents. She slipped both punches with minimal movement, reading his body language like text on a page. Her counter was a straight right that caught him on the hinge of his jaw, not hard enough to knock him out but hard enough to scramble his equilibrium. He stumbled. She followed with a low kick to his lead leg that buckled his knee. Then she was behind him somehow, one arm snaking around his neck, her body glued to his back. The rear naked choke locked in with professional precision. Hayes had maybe 3 seconds of consciousness left. He clawed at her forearm, tried to tuck his chin, did everything the instructors had taught him. Nothing worked. Her technique was flawless. The pressure built steadily, cutting off blood flow to his brain, and the last thing he saw before the darkness took him was his own reflection in the polished floor, being held effortlessly by someone a third his size. She lowered him to the ground gently as he went limp, checked his pulse, positioned him in recovery position. Then she stood up and looked around the silent mess hall. "He'll be fine in 30 seconds, she said. "Someone should probably stay with him." She walked back to her tray, picked it up, and headed toward her corner table. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. They all just watched her go, this small woman in oversized utilities who just systematically dismantled one of their battalion's toughest fighters like she was teaching a class. She sat down, picked up her fork, and began eating her eggs. Behind her, Hayes started to stir. Around her, the mess hall remained frozen in tableau. And in the doorway, unnoticed by everyone, a Navy SEAL commander watched with a slight smile, then turned and walked away. The questions started before Hayes fully regained consciousness. Marines are many things, but they're not stupid. They just watched something impossible become reality and they wanted explanations. A lance corporal from Hayes' squad approached the woman's table first, keeping his distance, hands visible and non-threatening. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Who are you?" She finished chewing a bite of toast before answering. "Lieutenant Kira Volkov. I'm assigned to JSOC liaison duties for the next 6 weeks." She said it like she was reporting the weather. Unremarkable. The lance corporal processed this information. "Your Navy?" "Yes." "Special warfare?" "Yes." Behind him, Hayes was sitting up now, assisted by his friends, looking at the back of her head with an expression that mixed embarrassment with dawning horror. The lance corporal pressed on. "And you're here at Pendleton because cross-branch training coordination. I'm helping develop new integration protocols for joint operations." Took a sip of orange juice. "It's very boring administrative work mostly, lots of PowerPoint presentations." Someone laughed nervously. The lance corporal tried again. "Those moves you used on Hayes, that's SEAL training. Some of it, most of it's actually from a Russian martial art called Systema. My grandfather taught me when I was 8. She looked up at him then, those gray eyes calm and completely unbothered. "It emphasizes efficiency. Why use 10 movements when 3 will do? Right. The lance corporal didn't know what else to say. Well, thank you for not seriously hurting him. You could have. Of course I could have, but Corporal Hayes made a mistake, not a declaration of war. The appropriate response is correction, not destruction. She went back to her eggs. He seems like a good Marine, just needs to learn that confidence shouldn't outpace judgment. Hayes was standing now, supported by his friends. His face was still red, but the flush had changed quality, shifting from anger to shame. He walked over to her table on unsteady legs and stood there for a long moment before speaking. "Ma'am, he stopped, started again. "I apologize, that was completely out of line. I had no right to put hands on you." Kira looked up at him. Her expression hadn't changed. "Apology accepted, Corporal. We all have bad mornings." "That doesn't excuse it." "No, it doesn't. But it explains it, and explanation is the first step toward improvement." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down before you fall down. You took a decent hit to the head." Hayes sat more because his legs were still shaky than because he wanted to. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. Her hands were small but heavily calloused, the knuckles slightly swollen in the way that comes from repeated impact. There was a thin scar running from her left temple into her hairline. Her eyes, pale gray and calm, held depths that suggested they'd seen things that would give most people nightmares. "How long have you been in?" he asked. 11 years. Enlisted out of high school, made E5 in 4 years, got picked up for officer candidate school at 6. She ate another bite of eggs. Commissioned as an O1, made O3 2 years ago. 11 years. Hayes did the math. That made her maybe 29. He was 23 and felt ancient after his deployments. "Where have you deployed?" "I can't tell you that." She said it matter-of-factly, no apology or explanation. Just a simple statement of classification. Hayes nodded slowly. SEALs who couldn't talk about their deployments were usually the ones who'd been doing the work nobody wanted to acknowledge, the dark work, the kind that happened in countries where America officially had no presence. "What's your call sign?" he asked. It was a personal question, maybe too personal given what had just happened, but she put him on the floor 3 times and somehow that created a strange intimacy. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing something internal. "Silence." "Silence," he repeated. "Why?" "Because that's what I bring to bad people in dark places." She finished her eggs and started on the toast. "And because when things go wrong on an operation, when everyone's screaming on comms and chaos is taking over, someone needs to be the calm voice that cuts through. Someone needs to bring the silence back." Hayes felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this small, quiet person he'd grabbed like she was nothing, had spent 11 years walking into the worst places on Earth and doing the worst things necessary to keep people safe. And she was sitting here eating scrambled eggs like it was nothing. "The psychological warrior thing," he said, remembering the cryptic title he'd heard whispered about certain SEAL operators. "That's real. Everything's real if you look at it the right way." She finished her toast. "SEALs don't just kick down doors, Corporal. We gather intelligence. We run PSYOPs. We infiltrate organizations and spend months building cover identities. We do things that require patience, perception, and the ability to understand what motivates people." She stood up, picking up her empty tray. "The violence is the easy part. Any strong person can be violent. The hard part is knowing when not to be." News of the incident spread through Camp Pendleton like wildfire, mutating with each retelling. By lunchtime, half the base thought a female SEAL had hospitalized 3 Marines. By dinner, rumors claimed she was a Russian defector who'd killed a man with her bare hands in the mess hall. By the next morning, the truth had mostly reasserted itself, but the damage to assumption and ego had been done. Marines who'd spent years believing they were the toughest warriors on Earth now had to reconcile that belief with the memory of watching one of their own get systematically dismantled by someone who looked like she belonged in a college library. The senior leadership's response was swift and pragmatic. By 0800 the next day, Lieutenant Kira Volkov was standing in front of 200 Marines in the battalion's main classroom, teaching a 3-hour block on hand-to-hand combatives. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The base commander, a colonel named Morrison who'd done 6 deployments himself, Watch from the back of the room as Kira worked through the basics with a patient competence that transformed skepticism into attention. She didn't demonstrate on Hayes, which everyone appreciated. Instead, she called up volunteers and walked them through the same techniques she'd used, breaking down each movement into components so simple that even the newest boots could understand. Efficiency, she repeated over and over. You're not trying to win a fight, you're trying to end a threat. There's a difference. She showed them how to read body language, how to recognize the micro-movements that preceded violence, how to position themselves to maximize advantage while minimizing exposure. Her teaching style was direct but not condescending, firm but not cruel. By the end of the first hour, every Marine in that room was taking notes. By the end of the second, they were asking technical questions that showed genuine curiosity. By the end of the third, they were looking at her not as a curiosity or an anomaly, but as what she was, a professional warrior who'd mastered her craft through dedication and sacrifice. Colonel Morrison approached her after the class dismissed. "That was well done, Lieutenant." "Thank you, sir. I'm sorry about what happened yesterday. Hayes is a good Marine, but he's got a blind spot about women in combat roles. He's far from the first person to make that mistake, sir. He won't be the last." She gathered her teaching materials into a neat stack. "But he apologized sincerely, and he was in the front row taking notes today. That shows character." Morrison nodded. "You handled it better than I would have." That evening, Hayes found Kira in the gym, working through a circuit that looked designed by someone who hated themselves. She was on her third set of pull-ups when he walked in, and he waited until she'd finished before approaching. Her back was to him, but she spoke anyway, apparently possessed of that situational awareness that good operators develop. "If you're here to apologize again, Corporal, it's unnecessary. We're past it." "I'm not here to apologize." Hayes moved into her field of vision. "I'm here to ask if you'd be willing to train me, privately." She dropped from the bar and landed light as a cat, barely breathing hard despite the workout intensity. "Why?" "Because I've spent 5 years thinking I knew what combat capability looked like, and yesterday you showed me I don't know anything." He met her eyes steadily. "I'm not asking because I'm embarrassed, though I am. I'm asking because you have skills that could save lives, maybe mine, maybe my team's, and I'm not too proud to learn from someone better than me." Kira studied him for a long moment. "You understand this wouldn't be easy. I don't do gentle, I don't do encouraging. I teach the way I was taught, which is through repetition until muscle memory overrides conscious thought." "I understand. You'd be training before your regular PT, which means 0430 start times. I'll be here. And if you quit if you decide it's too hard or too early or too demanding, I won't hold it against you, but I also won't take you back. You get one chance." Hayes nodded. "One chance is all I need, ma'am." She considered this, then extended her hand. 0430 tomorrow, Gym 3. Bring wraps for your hands and prepare to hurt." He shook her hand. Her grip was like steel cable wrapped in silk. "Thank you, Lieutenant." "Don't thank me yet, Corporal. You haven't seen what I'm going to put you through." But she was smiling slightly when she said it, the first real smile he'd seen from her. The next morning, Hayes learned what pain really meant. Kira's training methodology was built on a foundation of repetition and incremental resistance that pushed the body to its absolute limits, then kept pushing. They started with basics: stance, movement, breath control. For 30 minutes, they did nothing but practice weight shifts and footwork, while Kira critiqued every micro-adjustment with the precision of a watchmaker examining gears. "Again," she said for the 50th time, "your right foot is half an inch too far forward. It compromises your base." Hayes adjusted. "Like this? Better. Again." They did it again, and again, and again. By the time they moved to actual techniques, Hayes' legs were shaking from the isometric holds and constant micro-adjustments. Kira showed him the same wrist lock she'd used on him in the mess hall, breaking it down into 7 discrete movements, each of which she made him practice 100 times before moving to the next. "Muscle memory," she explained. "When violence comes, you won't have time to think. Your body needs to know what to do without instruction from your brain." She demonstrated on him slowly, walking him through each pressure point, each angle of manipulation. "Here, this point on the radius. This is what made your arm fold. Too little pressure and you don't control the joint. too much and you cause damage you might not want. What if I do want to cause damage? Then you adjust here. She moved her thumb slightly. Now instead of controlling the joint, you're breaking it. The difference is 3 millimeters and 1 pound of pressure. They worked for 90 minutes without stopping. By the end, Hayes was soaked in sweat and his forearms felt like they'd been tenderized with hammers. Kira looked like she just finished a light warm-up. Tomorrow we'll work on reading body language, she said. Be ready to get hit, a lot. Hayes nodded, too tired to speak. As he was leaving, Kira called after him. Corporal, you did well. Lasting the full session on your first day puts you ahead of most. It was the closest thing to praise he'd heard from her. That night, word spread that Hayes was training privately with Lieutenant Volkov. 3 more Marines approached her the next day asking for the same opportunity. Then 5 more. Then 10. By the end of the week, Kira had 15 Marines showing up at 0430 for training sessions that left them exhausted and enlightened in equal measure. She taught them all without favoritism or prejudice, pushing each one to their limits while maintaining the same calm demeanor that had characterized her handling of Hayes. The Marines started calling her Silence, even to her face, using her call sign with the respect usually reserved for senior NCOs who'd proven themselves in combat. The transformation in battalion culture was subtle but unmistakable. Marines who'd spent years making jokes about women in combat roles found themselves training under one, following her instructions with the same attention they'd give any combat veteran. The casual sexism that had characterized so much of military culture didn't disappear overnight, but it got quieter, more cautious, constrained by the concrete reality of competence demonstrated and respect earned. Colonel Morrison noticed. He started attending the early morning training sessions, watching from the sidelines as Kira worked her students through increasingly complex scenarios. On the 7th day, he approached her after she dismissed the group. Lieutenant, I have a proposition for you. Sir, your liaison assignment was scheduled for 6 weeks. I'd like to extend it to 6 months, and I'd like to formalize these training sessions you're running, make them part of the official battalion curriculum. Kira considered this. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I should tell you that I have operational commitments that might pull me away on short notice. Understood, but until those commitments activate, you'd be doing more good here than in any office pushing papers. These Marines are learning things they can't get anywhere else. He paused. And frankly, this whole base needed the wake-up call you provided. The wake-up call where I put one of your corporals on the floor. Wake-up call where you prove that capability comes in forms we don't always recognize, that we need to judge people by their skills, not our assumptions. Morrison smiled slightly. Hayes told me something yesterday. He said training with you has made him a better Marine, not just a better fighter. He said you taught him that strength isn't about domination, it's about discipline. Kira was quiet for a moment. Hayes is a good student, he listens. Not everyone does. Then teach the ones who will. That's an order, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. So the training continued and grew. Kira added afternoon sessions for Marines who couldn't make the pre-dawn schedule. She started incorporating scenario-based training, putting her students into high-stress situations where they had to make split-second decisions about when to fight and when to de-escalate. She brought in elements of her SEAL training, land navigation, communications protocols, tactical medicine. She taught them how to read terrain, how to move silently through any environment, how to become invisible when necessary and unstoppable when required. The Marines absorbed it all with the desperate enthusiasm of people who have suddenly realized how much they don't know. 3 weeks into the extended assignment, everything changed. Kira was in the middle of an afternoon training session, working with a group of 8 Marines on close-quarters battle tactics when her phone buzzed with a specific pattern. 3 short pulses, 2 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code, which meant priority recall. She glanced at the screen, read the encrypted message, and her expression shifted in ways too subtle for most people to notice. But Hayes noticed. He'd been studying her for weeks now, learning to read the micro-expressions that crossed her face in the instant before she controlled them. Something was wrong. Take 5, she told the group. Hayes with me. They walked to the edge of the training area out of earshot. Ma'am, I'm being recalled. Tonight, something's happened. She was already running through mental checklists, preparing for deployment in the way operators do: compartmentalize, prioritize, execute. "You'll need to take over the morning sessions until I get back." Hayes felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Where are you going?" "I can't tell you that, but Hayes," she looked at him directly, "if something happens to me if I don't come back, I need you to know that these past 3 weeks have been good. Teaching you, teaching all of you, has reminded me why I do this work. It's not about the violence. It's about preparing people to survive, to protect others, to be better than they were." "You're coming back," Hayes said firmly. "You're too skilled not to come back. Skill matters less than you think when bad luck enters the equation." She gripped his shoulder, the same shoulder she'd grabbed him by that first day, but this time it was gentle, grounded. "Promise me you'll keep training. Don't let what you've learned go to waste." "I promise." She nodded once, then turned and walked away, already making calls on her encrypted phone. Hayes watched her go and felt the weight of understanding settle over him. Whatever mission was pulling her away, it was the kind that operators didn't always return from. The kind that happened in the dark places she'd mentioned, where silence was both weapon and shroud. By 1800, she was gone. By 2000, Hayes had gathered the training group and explained that Lieutenant Volkov had been called away on urgent assignment. Nobody asked for details. They all understood that some questions didn't have answers you were cleared to hear. They trained without her, following the protocols she'd established, pushing themselves the way she'd pushed them. But it wasn't the same. Her presence had been the center around which everything else orbited, and her absence left a vacuum that felt like grief. 4 days passed with no word, then 5. On the 6th day, Hayes was running morning PT with his platoon when he saw Colonel Morrison striding across the parade ground with an expression that made Hayes' stomach drop. "Hayes with me, now." They walked to Morrison's office in silence. Once inside with the door closed, Morrison turned to face him. Lieutenant Volkov's mission went sideways. Her team was ambushed in Syria, 6 clicks outside a village we're not supposed to be operating near. She took shrapnel from an IED. She's in surgery at Landstuhl right now. Hayes felt the floor shift under his feet. Is she going to make it? Too early to tell. But I'm telling you because you deserve to know, and because if she does make it, she's going to need people who understand what she's been through. Morrison sat down heavily. The mission was a high-value target capture. Someone leaked the intelligence. Her whole team walked into a kill box. How many made it out? 3 out of 8. Volkov was the ranking officer. She held the perimeter while her team extracted the wounded. That's how she got hit. She was the last one out. Hayes closed his eyes. Of course she was. Silence, the woman who'd spent 3 weeks teaching Marines how to survive, had stayed behind to make sure her team survived. It was exactly what he would have expected from her. "Sir, when we get word on her condition, you'll be the first to know after her command." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "She spoke well of you, Hayes. In her after-action reports from the training, said you had potential to be an excellent instructor yourself if you stayed humble. She told me not to let what I learned go to waste." "Then don't. Keep the training going. Keep her methods alive. That's how you honor what she taught you." Hayes nodded, not trusting his voice. He left Morrison's office and walked straight to Gym 3, where the afternoon training session was supposed to start in an hour. He stood there in the empty space, remembering every lesson, every correction, every moment of hard-won understanding. Then he began to plan. The session that afternoon had 30 Marines instead of the usual 15. Word had spread about Volkov's injury, and people who'd been skeptical of her methods suddenly wanted to learn them. Hayes taught them everything he could remember, channeling her patient competence, her refusal to accept less than total commitment. It wasn't perfect. His technique wasn't as clean as hers, his explanations not as precise. But he tried, and the Marines responded to that effort with serious attention. 10 days after the ambush, word came through. Kira Volkov had survived surgery and was being transferred to Walter Reed for extended recovery. She'd lost her spleen, taken 37 pieces of shrapnel throughout her left side, and suffered a traumatic brain injury from the blast overpressure. She'd be in the hospital for at least 3 months, followed by 6 months of rehabilitation. Her career as an operator was likely over. Hayes requested leave to visit her. Morrison approved it immediately. For days later, Hayes was walking through the corridors of Walter Reed, carrying a card signed by every Marine who trained under her. He found her room on the third floor, knocked quietly, and entered. She was smaller than he remembered. The hospital bed dwarfed her. Tubes and monitors surrounded her like mechanical sentinels. Her left side was bandaged from hip to shoulder, but her eyes were the same pale gray, and when she saw him, she smiled. "Corporal Hayes, you're supposed to be training." "I am training, ma'am. Just took a brief detour to check on my instructor." He set the card on her bedside table. "The whole group signed it. We wanted you to know we're thinking about you." She picked up the card with her right hand, her left arm still immobilized. "Read it slowly." Her eyes got wet, but no tears fell. "That's kind of them, kind of you. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck made of explosives." She set the card down carefully. "The doctors say I'll walk again, maybe even run eventually, but the operator life is done. Too much internal damage, too much recovery time. By the time I'm fully healed, I'll be too far behind to catch up." Hayes pulled a chair next to her bed. "So you'll teach instead?" "Maybe, if anyone wants to learn from a broken-down has-been." "Ma'am, with respect, you're the toughest person I've ever met. You survived an ambush, took shrapnel meant for your team, and you're lying here making jokes about it." He leaned forward. "Every Marine you trained at Pendleton would line up to learn from you, broken down or not. You taught us that strength isn't about being invincible. It's about getting back up after you get knocked down." She studied him for a long moment. "You've gotten better at reading people. I can see it in how you carry yourself." "I had a good teacher." They talked for an hour. She told him what she could about the mission, the intelligence failure, the moment the IED detonated and the world turned to fire and chaos. He told her about the training continuing in her absence, about how the techniques she'd taught were spreading through the battalion like wildfire, about how even the most skeptical Marines were now advocates for her methods. When visiting hours ended, Hayes stood to leave. "Ma'am, I want you to know something. What you did for us these past few months, teaching us when you could have been doing anything else, that mattered. You changed how an entire battalion thinks about capability and respect. That's a legacy that's going to outlast any single mission." Kira looked up at him. "Take care of them, Hayes. Keep teaching. Don't let the lessons die." "I won't. You have my word." He saluted, which felt right even though they were indoors and she was in a hospital bed. She returned it as best she could with one arm. "And Hayes, thank you for not treating me differently, for seeing past the injuries to the person. You taught me to see clearly, ma'am. I'm just applying the lessons." He left her there, small and battered in that hospital bed, and felt something like pride mixed with grief. She'd survived against terrible odds, but the cost had been high. The woman who'd walked through dark places bringing silence would now have to find a new way to serve, a new mission to give her life meaning. The question was whether the military would be smart enough to use her properly. 3 months later, Kira was discharged from Walter Reed with a cane and a permanent limp. The Navy offered her a medical retirement with full benefits. She turned it down. Instead, she requested assignment to the training command, specifically asking to develop curriculum for special operations integration. The Navy, recognizing both her experience and her reputation, agreed. 6 months after that, she was standing in front of a classroom at Naval Special Warfare Center, teaching the next generation of SEALs about the same principles she taught Hayes and his Marines. Efficiency. Awareness. The difference between ending threats and feeding egos. The students were skeptical at first. They saw the cane, the limp, the small woman who looked like she belonged anywhere but in a room full of aspiring commandos. Then she demonstrated techniques that put the doubters on the floor, explained concepts that illuminated blind spots they didn't know they had, and told stories from 11 years of operations that made their planned deployments look like practice runs. Within a week, they were calling her silence with the same respect Hayes Marines had used. Within a month, her classes were mandatory for all incoming candidates. Within a year, her teaching methodology was being adopted across the entire special operations community. And Hayes kept his promise. He made instructor himself, running combatives programs throughout 2nd Battalion, always crediting the techniques to Lieutenant Volkov, always emphasizing the principles she'd taught. When Marines asked him why he was so passionate about the training, he told them the story of the mess hall, the moment when all his assumptions shattered and he learned that capability doesn't announce itself. It demonstrates. Word of the mess hall incident became legend, passed between units, growing in the telling but never straying too far from the truth. Marines who'd never met Kira Volkov knew her call sign and what it represented. Soldiers in other branches heard versions of the story and adjusted their own assumptions accordingly. The culture shifted incrementally. One mind changed at a time, spreading outward from that single moment when pride collided with competence and learned a hard lesson. 5 years after the ambush, Hayes made sergeant and was assigned as an instructor at the School of Infantry. His first act was to invite Lieutenant Volkov, now a full lieutenant commander despite her medical limitations, to give a guest lecture. She arrived at 0700 on a Tuesday morning, walking with only a slight limp now, years of physical therapy having restored most of her mobility. The auditorium was packed with 300 Marines, all of them young, all of them confident in that way that comes from surviving boot camp and infantry training. Hayes introduced her simply. "This is Lieutenant Commander Kira Volkov, call sign Silence. She's going to talk to you about assumptions, competence, and what it means to be a warrior. I recommend you listen carefully." Kira stepped to the podium, surveyed the sea of young faces, and began to speak. "6 years ago, a Marine corporal grabbed my shoulder in a mess hall at Camp Pendleton. He was bigger than me, stronger than me, more decorated than me. He made an assumption based on what he could see, and that assumption nearly cost him his career." She paused, letting them absorb that. "I put him on the floor 3 times in as many minutes, not because I'm superhuman, but because I'd spent 11 years training for moments exactly like that. Because I understood that combat isn't about size or strength. It's about precision, awareness, and the discipline to execute under pressure." The room was silent. 300 Marines, not one of them moving. That corporal's name was Hayes. He's now Sergeant Hayes, and he's one of the best instructors in this entire training command. You know why? Because when I put him on the floor, he didn't get angry. He didn't make excuses. He asked me to teach him. He chose growth over ego. Kira's lecture lasted 90 minutes and covered everything from tactical decision-making to cultural competence in foreign operations. She used examples from her deployments, carefully sanitized but still vivid, painting pictures of missions where success depended on understanding people rather than dominating them. She talked about the ambush in Syria, about the moment the IED detonated, and she had to choose between her own survival and her team's. "I chose the team," she said simply. "And that choice cost me my operational career. But I'd make it again in a heartbeat because that's what warriors do. We protect. We sacrifice. We put the mission and the team above ourselves." She paused, letting that sink in. "But here's what I learned in the hospital during those months of recovery. Sacrifice doesn't always mean death. Sometimes it means adaptation. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with patience and teaching and the slow work of changing minds." She looked out at the young faces watching her. "Every one of you in this room is going to deploy. Some of you will see combat. Some of you will come home different than you left, whether that's from wounds visible or invisible. And all of you are going to face moments where your assumptions are challenged, where reality doesn't match your expectations." She gripped the edges of the podium. "In those moments, I want you to remember this. Competence is earned, not assumed. Respect is demonstrated, not demanded. And strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, learning from the fall, and teaching others how to stay on their feet." The room erupted in applause. Not the polite golf clap that lectures usually received, but genuine sustained applause that came from people who just heard something that resonated in their bones. Hayes watched from the side of the auditorium and felt that same pride he'd felt in the hospital 5 years earlier. After the lecture, a line of Marines formed to ask Kira questions, get her signature on training manuals, or just shake her hand. She stayed for 3 hours talking to each one individually, offering advice and encouragement with the same patient competence she'd shown when teaching Hayes. One private, barely 18, approached nervously. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "When Corporal Hayes grabbed you in the mess hall, were you scared?" Kira considered this seriously. No. I was prepared. There's a difference. Fear comes from uncertainty. Preparation creates certainty. I knew what I could do, knew what techniques would work, knew how the situation would resolve. That knowledge eliminated fear. What about in Syria, when the IED went off? Then I was terrified, Kira said simply, because no amount of preparation can eliminate the chaos of combat. The difference is that training allowed me to function despite the fear, to make good decisions while my body was screaming at me to freeze or run. The private nodded slowly. How do you learn to do that? The same way you learn anything. Practice. Repetition. Putting yourself in uncomfortable situations until they become comfortable. Fighting through the fear over and over until your body understands that fear is just information, not instruction. She smiled slightly. And having good teachers doesn't hurt. Find people who know more than you do and learn from them. Check your ego at the door and accept that there's always someone better, faster, stronger, smarter. Then work to close that gap. The private thanked her and walked away. Hayes approached as the last of the line dispersed. That was incredible, ma'am. They'll be talking about this for years. They'll be talking about the mess hall incident for years. The lecture is just context. She gathered her notes. But thank you. It felt good to teach again, to see that fire in their eyes when they realize how much there is to learn. You should do more of these. Travel the training circuit, spread the gospel. Maybe. My command has been pushing me to develop a full curriculum, something that could be taught at every SOI and every special operations training pipeline. Standardize the methodology. She looked at him. I'd want you involved. You've been teaching these principles longer than anyone except me. Your input would be invaluable. Hayes felt something swell in his chest. I'd be honored, ma'am. Good. We start in 3 weeks. Clear your calendar because this is going to be intensive. They walked out of the auditorium together, teacher and student, both of them marked by combat in different ways. Both of them committed to the same mission, preparing the next generation to survive what they'd survived, to learn what they'd learned, to become better warriors through understanding rather than assumption. Over the next 2 years, they built something unprecedented. A comprehensive training program that integrated physical combatives with psychological preparation, cultural awareness with tactical proficiency. They taught it at Marine bases, Army posts, naval stations, Air Force installations. They taught officers and enlisted, men and women, people from every background and every military specialty. And everywhere they went, the message was the same. Judge people by their capability, not your assumptions. Respect is earned through demonstration, not demanded through rank. Strength comes in many forms, and the strongest warriors are the ones who never stop learning. The program's reputation grew. Military publications wrote articles. Defense analysts studied the methodology. Other nations' militaries requested briefings. What had started as a mess hall confrontation had evolved into a cultural shift that rippled across the entire military community. 3 years after the lecture at School of Infantry, Hayes received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. He was going as a combat advisor, embedded with Afghan commandos conducting operations against Taliban strongholds. Before he left, he stopped by Kira's office at the training command. She was buried in paperwork, developing assessment metrics for the new curriculum, but she looked up when he knocked. Hayes, I heard about your orders. Congratulations. Thank you, ma'am. I wanted to see you before I shipped out. He sat down across from her desk. Say thank you properly for everything you've taught me. You've already thanked me. Multiple times. This is unnecessary. Maybe. But I need you to know that everything I know about being a warrior, about teaching, about respecting capability wherever I find it, I learned from you. That morning in the mess hall when I grabbed your shoulder, I was an arrogant kid who thought toughness was the only thing that mattered. You showed me I was wrong, and then instead of writing me off, you taught me how to be better. Kira set down her pen. You did the hard part, Hayes. You were willing to learn. That's rarer than you think. Will you do me a favor? Depends on the favor. If something happens to me over there, if I don't come back, will you keep teaching? Keep spreading these lessons. Don't let the mission die. She looked at him seriously. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're too well trained, too aware, too disciplined. You're going to come back, make Master Sergeant, eventually become a Sergeant Major and spend the next 20 years turning boots into warriors. But if, Hayes, she cut him off gently, I promise, if the worst happens, which it won't, I'll keep teaching, but you're going to be fine. You're prepared. Remember what I told that private. Preparation eliminates fear. You're as prepared as anyone could be. Hayes nodded, feeling something release in his chest. Thank you, ma'am. Stay safe out there. And when you get back, I expect a full debrief on how the training held up in real combat conditions. You'll have it. Hayes deployed 3 weeks later. For 6 months, he worked with Afghan commandos in Helmand Province, conducting night raids and reconnaissance missions against Taliban positions. The training Kira had given him proved invaluable.